conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, it's all happening in Europe. Germexit. Yes, Germany have been knocked out of the World Cup, and that on the eve of a really vital, important European summit. It takes place tomorrow. The leaders of 28 countries will all be there in attendance, and there is a crisis. The funny thing is, this crisis doesn't involve the United Kingdom. It involves one Angela Merkel. It'll be Merkel's 75th Leaders' Summit since she became the Chancellor of Germany, and many are speculating this could be her last summit. So does the football? Is there a sense of foreboding about Merkel's future? Indeed, the argument that is going on between Italy and Germany over immigration, let alone debates about how the Eurozone could be managed, means it's going to be a very hot and difficult day in Brussels tomorrow. I shall be there watching all of it and commenting. And isn't it funny that with Europe in this state of genuine crisis, and with the royal assent having been given just yesterday to the EU withdrawal bill, I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more relieved. I kind of think that the bullet has left the end of the rifle and it's quite difficult to put it back in. I'm still very frustrated and angry about the price we're prepared to pay, the time we're spending, the concept of a transition deal, but it does begin now to look like we will be leaving on the 29th of March next year at 11 p.m. And yet, despite all of those things I've talked about, the football perhaps not directly included, Tony Blair comes back again. He speaks this morning at a big meeting, at Chatham House, and he starts off with all the old warnings. He's really very worried that the kind of nationalism that is now sweeping the world could take us back to the 1930s. Quite what his evidence for that is, I don't know, but that's what he says. But he then strikes this note. He says, if the European Union reformed, and if the European Union gave Britain back something on immigration, the date of our departure could be delayed and we could have a second referendum. Reform. Do you know, Bruno Le Maire, who is the French finance minister, said yesterday there will be a budget for the Eurozone and a Eurozone minister who will have power over everybody in the member states. Reform, Mr. Blair? The only reform they know in Brussels is to centralise powers even more deeply. And I do think, against this backdrop of maybe Merkel, that solid figure that has been there, and forget Mr. Juncker. He's a bit of fun after lunch, but he's not really in control of anything. It's Angela Merkel that's been running the European Union ever since the economic crisis of 2008. And given that she's perhaps very close to being on the way out, given that the EU withdrawal bill was signed off by the Queen yesterday, and yet Blair makes this speech now, at this moment, and I'm asking you, has Tony Blair now become a delusional figure? Indeed, were those 100,000 people who marched in London deluding themselves? Isn't the truth of it that we are now leaving the European Union? There is no reform in sight. There is no deal to be done that would keep us in. Tell me what you think. I think he's lost the plot, personally. I think why he would do it amazes me. Here's a man who led a Labour Party that had been through a huge civil war. He led them to 3 general election victories. He was, whether you like his politics or not, a supremely successful Prime Minister, a brilliant public orator, a man of great wit and great charm. I saw that at first hand, and I may have disagreed with many of the things he, Alistair Campbell, Peter Mandelson did. But, my goodness me, the man's a winner, isn't he? And then he resigns, and he gets out 2 years before the financial crash. Nothing to do with me, Gov. In a way, it was a brilliant career, and he should be enjoying his retirement and making his millions and running his foundation. I feel he rather demeans himself by going back into this public debate. I fear he makes himself look stupid. Worst of all, I think Tony Blair, folks, is deluding himself. Now, tell me I've got this wrong. Tell me, actually, he's still with the mainstream pulse of British public opinion, and you can do that by calling me on 0345 6060 973. Or if, like me, you think, no, he's lost the plot, he's making a fool of himself, text to 84850. Or maybe you can give me a very good reason why, actually, all those problems we're seeing with Mrs. Merkel, with the Italians in Europe, are a reason why perhaps Blair's right and we should stay, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC, and watch us on Facebook Live and comment there too. Let's go and get an opinion from Richard, a new caller to this show, who's calling from Manchester. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm all right. Tell me, how far away are those fires on Saddleworth Moor from you?
Yeah, the smoke's coming through, and I'm at the other side of Manchester. And, well, it's not too bad, you know what I mean? We went through the war, didn't we? And we did very
well. I didn't, Richard. How old are you?
Oh, I'm 75 now.
All right, well, you did then. So
I don't think they gave up. Me and my twin brother, he gave up.
So you can actually... how far away Saddleworth, then?
7, 8 miles.
OK, it's not that far away at all. OK, well, we wish the fire services well up there. It looks like a difficult thing to deal with. Now, Richard, you're calling me from one of the great Tony Blair heartlands, Manchester, who voted decisively for him in 97, 01 and 05. He was a great champion politically in Manchester. Is he now demeaning himself, deluding himself with saying that a deal could be done, maybe we're not going to leave, and we can have another referendum?
Of course he is. Everybody knows that he is. But he's got all these people around him. Please just be patient with me, because I've been trying to phone you for a long time.
Right, well, you've got the floor now, Richard. I'm going to sit back and listen.
You're a hero. You're the only one who's trying to take the people to something that is absolutely 100% cast iron right. We should come out of Europe. We should come out of Europe. Listen to Nigel Farage. He's giving us the truth.
Well, Richard, that's incredibly sweet of you, but we're not talking about me. We can another time, of course. But we're talking about Tony Blair. Now, if
in Manchester, get my number, give me a ring, and I'll buy you the biggest lunch you've ever had in your life.
Well, that's a challenge, Richard, I can assure you. But why is Blair... Richard, why is Blair doing this?
I don't know. He's got enough money to retire. He's obviously in the grip of people, the big financiers that you've been talking about for a long time.
Do you think Mr. Soros is having an influence on Tony Blair?
Of course. Somewhere along the line, as money gets exchanged. Excuse me if
that's a terrible thing to say. We've got to be very careful about that, Richard. There's no evidence that Mr. Blair has enriched himself since being Prime Minister. Well, maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. But somehow Blair believes in this globalist order, doesn't he? And he's not going to give up.
No, but you go back to last Sunday, you were on the political show Sunday with Alistair Campbell, okay? Mm-hmm. That guy is responsible for most of what Blair says, most of what Blair does, and he doesn't do anything unless Campbell's involved in it. And please don't get me on more about Campbell. This man has been responsible for everything that Blair has done, and I voted for Tony Blair.
Did you?
Yeah, and now I'm saying to you, why is, and please advise me, Alistair Campbell, and why is Blair getting involved in these things? I don't understand it. I
think the charitable explanation, Richard, is they believe in it. They believe in the project of European Union. They believe in globalisation. They think increased diversity at any level is a good thing for society. And I just think, particularly in the case of Blair, he should have walked away as this 3 times winner of general elections, this great success in British politics, and I now think he demeans himself and his legacy. Richard, I thank you, and I look forward to that lunch very much indeed. Brenda is a new caller from Newcastle, Tyne and Wear. Good evening, Brenda.
Good evening.
So, Tony Blair, again, you're calling me from a city that voted for Blair again and again and again. Why is he... Brenda, is he demeaning himself, deluding himself?
Deluding himself, and I think he's lost a lot of the support he had. Why I'm really ringing is you're falling into the same trap as other parties. You hardly ever take a phone call from the North East.
Oh, that's not true. That is not true, Brenda. That is not true.
next one was across the other side, the Lake District, Carlisle.
Brenda, we take lots of calls from the north. But anyway, you're calling from the north. You've got the LBC platform.
Yeah.
Why is Blair doing this, Brenda, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's power. I think he likes to think he's still got it.
What, power to influence our opinions? Power to change the agenda?
I think he thinks he's got the power for everything. I think his ego's massive. He can't stay out the limelight.
Well, but he could do, because he's really in danger, isn't he? And at some point, we all pass on to another world, and the obituaries get written. And I think the danger for Blair is that what gets written about him is this giant of late 20th century and early 21st century politics, the man who made the Labour Party a massive winning machine, finishes up the end of his political days flogging a dead horse, denying that the British people voted in a referendum to leave the EU. It's a very dangerous thing for his legacy, I think.
Well, he's in the same place as Merkel now, isn't he?
Well, Merkel's not quite there yet, but I tell you what, after tomorrow, she might be. And Germany are out of the World Cup, Brenda. How optimistic are you feeling about England?
Well, I think you've got to support England, and I think we need to get back in the rule of our own country.
Absolutely. And will you be flying the English flag tomorrow, Brenda?
Not really.
Do you think the Prime Minister should be flying the flag from number 10 Downing Street tomorrow?
Definitely.
Definitely. Well, I'm told she will do. Brenda, I thank you. More about Theresa May, 10 Downing Street, and the Cross of St George in a moment. For now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's 7:15. No, Tony Blair really genuinely thinks that we can change our minds, have a second referendum, get a bit of EU reform, they'll give us back some powers on immigration, and we don't need to leave the EU. And I'm asking you whether he has actually become delusional, because I think he has. Debbie thinks she's got the answer when she texts me and says he wants to be president of the EU, explains it all. Blair, president of the EU? I thought he had bigger ambitions than that. Hey, we'll have to see. The chances of that, I got to tell you, Debbie, are just about zero. But to listen to the conversation and chatter going on in this country, football is coming home. We're all very bullish, very optimistic. We've had a great win against Panama, albeit a late goal in the first game from Harry Kane. We've won our first two matches. We've got Belgium tomorrow. Now, I have to tell you, honestly, I'm hoping and praying that we beat Belgium, because if we don't, Mr. Verhofstadt is going to be totally unbearable in Strasbourg next week. So I very much hope we do. But big pressure has been put by the Sun newspaper on the Prime Minister. Fly George. The Sun calls on the government to back England's World Cup campaign by proudly flying the English flag up and down Whitehall. And here is what Prime Minister May said earlier on today.
Number 10 will be flying the England flag on the day of each of England's matches from now on, and we'll be encouraging other government departments to do the same. Next year, we will do the same for the Women's World Cup.
There you are. So the Cross of St George is going to fly above number 10 Downing Street and in other Whitehall buildings. Let me tell you, I have always been one to say we should not be ashamed of flying the English flag, and I've got English cufflinks and English socks and all the rest of it. And I think, when people like Emily Thornberry look down their nose at White Van Man displaying that flag, they misunderstand the mood of this people. The idea that the Cross of St George is some emblem of unpleasantness or extremism is total and utter nonsense. We heard the same thing about the Union Jack back in the 1970s and early 80s. So I'm all for the flag being flown. However, is it a good thing that the Prime Minister flies the Cross of St George above number 10? Number 10 is not where the Prime Minister of England sits. It's where the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom sits. And that has the Union flag. And whilst I'm all for supporting our team, I'm all for flying the flag, I worry that that image of the English flag flying above number 10 will be on every election leaflet for Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland and for the SNP in Scotland. And I think it plays directly into the hands of those who would like to break up the United Kingdom. All for the flag, but I'm not sure number 10 Downing Street is the appropriate place for it, regardless whether it's the men or the women playing. That is my view. Do respond. Let me know whether you agree or disagree with that. You can text using the hashtag, using 84850, or tweet using Farage on LBC. And I don't think it's the right thing for us to do. It's a shame Tony Blair is so tarnished. He's absolutely right on this. You are the delusional one. Brexit will fail. Well, I don't know who you are that's just said that. And I've been called worse than delusional by people other than you. But it does seem to me that given the royal assent's been given to the bill, even if May negotiates the most pathetic withdrawal terms, I do still think we're leaving on March 29th next year. Now, we've just had 2 callers from the north of England, despite Brenda telling me from Newcastle that we don't take northern callers. We're now coming south. We're going to Streatham and talking to Robbie, a first-time caller to this show. Robbie, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. Now, I mean, is Blair in with a shout with what he's saying, or has he lost the plot?
Well, basically, what I was thinking, if he were to summon up enough support for a second referendum, would it not have to be put through Parliament first with a vote to decide which way they're going to go, whether they're going to stay or leave, to save the fiasco that happened the first time round?
Well, we know how Parliament would vote, Robbie. Parliament would vote for us to remain. Of course they wouldn't, by a huge margin.
You think so?
Why, no, so.
Well, didn't they vote to leave last time after Julia Miller challenged them?
No. When the referendum itself happened, of 651 MPs, 156 back leave, the rest back remain. Now, that's still where they are. However, what they are doing now as a parliament is allowing Brexit to happen because they fear if they didn't, they'd all lose their seats.
Well, exactly. But this is what I'm saying. Right at the very beginning, did not anybody know that, our country is run on parliamentary decisions, not on people's decisions?
No, Robbie, because sometimes that decision is taken away from Parliament and given to the people, and that was the case with the Brexit referendum, wasn't it?
Well, allegedly so, but I understood that if Parliament felt that it was not in the best interests of the country, then they could veto it.
Well, constitutionally, Robbie, the referendum wasn't binding, although Mr Cameron and everybody else told us that it was. And I mean, Robbie, the real reason I think that Blair's barking up the wrong tree here is if the Labour Party or Tory Party were to turn against us leaving at the end of the Article 50 process, they both know they could not win the next election.
Right, OK, fine. Well, based on what you're saying there, even if we were to overturn, if a referendum were to be held and we wanted to remain, apparently, according to one of the laws within the European contract, is that all 27 countries would have to, or the remaining countries would have to be unanimous for us to go back in again.
Yes, they would.
So there's another hurdle there to overcome.
Yes, no, there would potentially be another hurdle. But Robbie, let me just ask you very quickly, do you think what Blair said today was realistic, given what happened yesterday with the royal assent being given to the EU withdrawal bill, and given the other problems, the wider problems they've got with Italy and Mrs Merkel's position?
Well, no, to be quite honest, I think he's deluded.
OK.
I'm very happy for Brexit to happen and for England to govern itself. And in fact, all the way back in, I think it was about 1973, was it, around about then when Edward Heath voted for us to go into the EEC, I was quite happy for that. I voted in favour of it. But it was the politicians that slid in, us joining the European Union and being governed by a Brussels Parliament through the back door, getting us into... It
was done, Robbie, very, very dishonestly. Thank you very much indeed. Love the show, Nigel. Think about Blair's 30s comment. And today now, Germany's been knocked out of the World Cup for the first time since 1938. Think about the date. Rich in Sussex, I don't quite buy into that one. He seems to be worried, as I was in 1997, and I was right how it would end up. I don't think he will be right. He is one of the reasons we're in this situation, I get on Twitter. Do you know, if Tony Blair had not opened up the doors unconditionally in the way that he did in 2004 to the biggest wave of immigration Britain's ever seen, I don't think we'd have voted Brexit. I do rather agree with that. Robin is calling from Whitehaven. Good evening, Robin.
Hello, Nigel.
Hello there. So has Blair lost the plot, or does he have a point?
I think he has a point, and he also has a right to air his opinion because he was a Prime Minister and he won 3 elections. So really he's got more credibility than the likes of Boris Johnson, Ian Duncan Smith and the relics of the past era of the Tory party. So I do think Blair's... I voted to leave myself.
Yeah.
I voted to leave, and I'm against the European Union, how it's structured, and I think it's undemocratic. But I did not vote for a Conservative-style Brexit. If we're going to leave, we've got to leave everything. We can't have a special deal for the City of London and let them keep our fisheries and other things. You know what I mean?
I do.
It's got to be lock, stock and barrel. No special deal for the City of London. We want the fisheries back. We want control of everything. So we can't be doing backdoor deals with the Tories, with the 27 countries. But Tony Blair has got every right to voice his opinion.
Robin, I agree with you, of course, that he's got the right to have that opinion and the right to state that opinion. I just doubt whether, for the sake of his own legacy, it's a very wise thing for him to be doing.
I think his legacy has already been written, to be honest, Nigel, and I won't say whatever because I do actually think he's a good Prime Minister. He invested a lot of money into the health service. Him and Gordon Brown, they've done away with a lot of debt in Africa, brought so many countries out of debt when they got the other countries to agree to abolish the debt. So I think he's done an absolute brilliant job, but he's tarnished his legacy with the Iraq war.
So on this issue, Robin, to sum you up, he has the right to do this, but he's wrong.
I think he's got the right to do it, but the thing is, Nigel, are we going to have this argument? I think I voted to leave, and I would like another referendum, but I would like another referendum so we can get everything in place and in order so we don't end up with a Theresa May hijacked Boris Johnson and the rest of the Conservatives.
Wow.
Like I said, special deal for the City of London.
Yeah, I share your... Robin, I share your concerns, and fisheries, I have to say, may not be a massive part of our economy, but I do feel they're doing absolutely nothing to get back our territorial waters. I thank you. I get on Twitter, it's so sad, you're right. The separatists will use number 10, flying the English flag, for political gain. I hope they'll also fly the Scottish, Welsh or Northern Irish flag in similar, albeit unlikely, circumstances. Well, I don't know what sporting event that would be. And that perhaps, in a way, Joshua, is part of the problem, isn't it? That we're doing this now for England. The separatists will use it. It will become emblematic. I don't think she should have given into this. She could have worn across the St George brooch. There are many things that she could have done. I'm just not sure that the office of the Prime Minister is the right place to do this. Christopher is calling from Eastbourne, another new caller to this show. Now tell me, Christopher, is Blair right, or is he deluding himself and maybe tarnishing his great legacy?
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. An absolute pleasure to speak to you. The trouble with Tony Blair is, I think he wanted to become president of the EU.
He did.
And unfortunately, he didn't make it. But he's part of the Kinnock Club, and I think basically he just loves the EU, and he just cannot leave them alone.
He loves it. It's his religion. He'll fight for them, even when the temple's crashing down around him, he'll still fight for it, Christopher.
Yes, and I think now he's got so consumed by the House of Lords, which is also the same as the judiciary and parts of the civil service, why they're trying to undermine 17.4 million citizens who voted to exit on the 23rd of June 2016. I really don't understand why Tony Blair's doing it.
No, well, Christopher, I'm struggling. I think you're right, though. He must simply believe in it. But I don't think he's doing himself or his long-term legacy any good at all. Christopher, I thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:30 and I'm asking, when Tony Blair says we can delay Brexit, renegotiate, get concessions, EU reform, control back of immigration, and then make a final decision in a second referendum to stay in, I'm asking you whether he's gone delusional in the very week that the royal assent was given to the EU withdrawal bill, and as the EU is on the eve of a really big crisis summit that could be Angela Merkel's last appearance as German leader. Some of you very strongly taking Blair's side. Adam on Facebook says he's not delusional. He's trying to save the nation. You're the delusional one. Thank you, Adam. Have a nice evening yourself. Nicholas says, you're scared of him, Nigel. You fear his arguments. He deserves to be heard. Your followers don't agree, but they always want to silence any opposition. No, Nicholas, I never want to silence opposition. I believe in free, honest, open, democratic debate. And I tell you something, Nicholas, if you want to ring in now on 0345 6060 973, you will get a very fair hearing from me. And you know, I'm very happy to debate Ken Clarke. I'm very happy to debate Alistair Campbell. I'm very happy to debate people who believe we should talk about things. What I loathe is where we get people on the left of the political spectrum who now want to shout down on no platform those with different points of view. So I won't have that, Nicholas, but you're very welcome to ring me. Richard says, I love all these politicians who respect democracy, then, in the same sentence, keep trying to stop what the people of the UK voted for. Don't they realise by doing this, they are damaging the Houses of Parliament and what it's supposed to stand for? Well, Blair, of course, Richard, is not in the Houses of Parliament. I'm suggesting that Blair potentially is damaging his legacy, given that he was such a massive winner in politics. Now, there's another crisis in this country, and one that I don't fully understand. We are told that some of Britain's biggest pub chains, Wetherspoons among them, are running low on beer. Now, this, of course, is pretty serious, given the hot weather and the England football game tomorrow against Belgium. We're told it's because of a shortage of CO2. We're also told that on Tuesday, Scotland's biggest abattoir shut until further notice, because of a shortage of CO2. CO2 being used, whether it's for pigs or chickens or whatever it is, as part of the stunning process pre-slaughter. We have a chronic shortage of CO2. I thought all the politicians were telling us we had too much CO2 and that's why the temperature was so warm. There was a terrible crisis of global warming because of CO2, but now we're running out of beer and we might run out of meat because there's not enough CO2. And I've read article after article about this and story after story. Folks, hands up, I don't understand why there's a CO2 shortage. Can somebody out there, please, who's got some scientific expertise in this field, tell me what's happened to the manufacture of CO2 in this country? Let me know on 0345 6060 973. I'm getting more back about my comments about the Cross of St George being flown from number 10. Solomon from Jerusalem says, I never thought about the valid point you've just made regarding the St George's flag above number 10. You've really got me worried now. Hey, I think you've got enough to worry about at the moment with some of the problems over there. But nobody's been prouder of that flag or saying they're English than me. Andrew Marr once read in a book, he said, Farage is every Frenchman's quintessential nightmare of what an Englishman may be. And I was delighted with that. I just worry that that symbol over number 10 plays to those who would wish to break up the United Kingdom, which I don't want. Monish is calling from Hounslow. Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. So is Blair on the money here, or has he gone delusional?
I think he is, but bearing on what you call him delusional, your opinion of delusional, I would rather have a delusional Blair or unelected, accidental president or prime minister like Theresa May, who just falls into place and has done nothing to prove herself. Where's your money lie if you're a betting man? Oh, look, if you're asking me to compare the track records of Tony Blair against Theresa May, there's not even a contest. Blair was a phenomenal orator, politician, persuader. He was a genuinely class act. I'm not going to argue against that for one moment. All I'm saying is that as somebody who's been out of office for over 10 years, he comes back into this debate, and I think he's beginning to look a bit out of touch. Maybe apparently it looks that way, but however, if someone comes with a bit of common sense, who are we to say and reject his ideas? Maybe we should look at them, because whatever's happening so far hasn't worked for us, has it?
Well, is it common sense for him to suggest that the European Union could reform and hand back powers the day after the French finance minister says they're going to put a Eurozone minister in place to take power over Eurozone members' economies?
Truthfully, I don't know. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but...
Well, it's certainly... No, I'll give you that. I'll be generous and say it's wishful thinking. I just think, as I say, he's got this towering reputation. I know the Iraq War is seen to be the big stain on his career, but he does have a reputation for being a winner. I just think it is slightly delusional, and I think for him and his legacy, it's a very damaging thing to be doing.
Okay, you and me go to a casino with Theresa May and Tony Blair. whose advice are you going to take? Which trip to play and what card to play? You tell me.
Neither. If it comes to going to a casino, do you know something? When I was younger, I used to go to casinos, convincing myself that this was the night I was going to strike the big one, and it never happened. And I now have given up casinos, and I wouldn't even go with Tony Blair, even on top Messiah form. But I do take your point about his track record. Thank you for the call. Let's go to Jason in Sutton. Jason, is Blair right on this, or is he beginning to look a bit silly?
I'd suggest he's partly right, but to be straight, I think the people's vote is the way out. It's the escape for people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and you and everybody else. Because if we have a people's vote...
We had one in 2016, 23rd of June, Jason.
Yeah, democracy doesn't die.
Oh, I see. So should we have one every fortnight, or...?
Well, hang on. If democracy died on a vote, Asquith would be prime... because the Liberals were elected in 1910.
Well, we had a vote. We had a vote in 1975 on a big constitutional question of whether we join the common market.
Very different question. Very different.
Yeah, well, of course it was. No, you're right. It was a lie, of course, because it wasn't just a common market. It was more than that, and we had to wait 41 years to have another vote. I mean, Jason, let's wait 20, 30 years maybe and have another decision. But you can't suggest another vote now, surely.
Well, I would absolutely not just suggest it, I would highly recommend a vote now, because we know what the repercussions are going to be. We've had 2 years. The swing from foreign direct investment out of the UK has been £300 billion. The tax take to HM Treasury in the last 2 years since the referendum is a £30 billion down.
Well, look, we're not going to argue about economics, because we always get told.
You don't want to listen to numbers. No, I know.
No, and your figures are wrong, because actually FDI in 2017 was higher than it was in 2016. Now, I do accept we've got problems now because people don't know exactly what May's going to negotiate. But the point here, Jason, is this: Blair is not suggesting the people's vote that 100,000 people marched for at the weekend. Blair is suggesting that we go back, have more negotiations with the EU, ask for concessions, and then put it to a vote. And I'm saying to you, Jason, with the best will in the world, the EU are rapidly centralising at the moment. They're not going to give us concessions, are they?
Well, unfortunately for us, the EU are bound by what's called due process. They're bound by the Treaty of the European Union. They're bound by the Treaty for the Functioning of the European Union. They're bound by over 50-plus other international treaties that they've got with other countries around the world. And they've said this from day one. The EU have not budged. They said, look, these are the rules that we have to live by and we have to negotiate.
Okay. So Jason,
as they go along.
Jason, you and I can disagree on the need for a people's vote, right? But the point I'm making here is that Blair is delusional if he thinks the EU are going to rip up their treaties and suddenly hand back a load of power to the UK.
Well, if you think I'm going to defend Tony Blair, then...
All right, OK. You've defended the EU, but not Tony Blair. That's fine. Let's go to Cara, who's calling from Folkestone. Good evening, Cara.
Nigel, it's Carol.
Carol, sorry, it was spelt wrong. Anyway, Carol, so is Blair right? I mean, my last caller thinks we need another referendum anyway, but maybe Blair's got this one wrong. I think Blair looks to be somebody who is going to go down in the history books as looking that he was successful when he was younger and he became a bit of a loser, frankly.
It was Julius Caesar, wasn't it, that said the evil that men do live after them, the good is often interred with their bones?
Well, yes, and is that the way Blair's going?
Well, I think Tony Blair and Lord Heseltine are the very best people to promote the EU. It was Mr. Heseltine, if you remember, it was Mr. Heseltine then, who stated that our great British public were not intelligent enough to decide whether or not to be part of the European Union. Well, we in Folkestone, Hythe and Shepway District Council, we voted, the whole of our area, voted to leave the governing of this country by the EU and to rule ourselves in every aspect. We're still waiting. But I will say one thing to you, it's something which I wanted to say to you a little while ago. My late mother, who wasn't a politician, wasn't interested at all in politics, she actually said right back in the 1970s that she was going to vote for the European Union to govern us because our chaps in Westminster couldn't do it well enough.
Yeah, and there was an argument for that, wasn't there? And that, of course, classically was the Italian argument. Let's have the European Union governing us because we can't do it ourselves. But hey, they've changed now. Carol, I think Blair's got it wrong, and you do too. Excuse me. Some answers coming in. Roger from Brentwood sensibly says you don't need CO2 for cask ales, Nigel. I know, Roger. This doesn't affect me at all. It's only lagers and fizzy things that are sold as bitters that are affected by this, not the stuff that I like. But somebody has come to my rescue. Steve says most CO2 is made as a byproduct of manufacturing fertiliser. A number of plants have closed due to a lack of demand and poor planning, hence the lack of CO2. Steve, thank you for that. Can somebody else now tell me how we solve the crisis? Otherwise, lager drinkers are going to be in real trouble watching the footy tomorrow. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC, and it's now 7:45. My latest episode of Farage Against the Machine, my podcast, I catch up with the controversial and highly opinionated Good Morning Britain presenter Piers Morgan. If you subscribe to my podcast, you'll hear us discuss why Piers thinks we should respect the office of the US President, the dangers of no platforming people in political debate, and why anyone giving an opinion these days could be in danger of being accused of fake news. Here's a clip of Piers.
I think it's a dangerous thing, this fake news debate. I know why Trump does it. He gets fed up with the universally negative coverage of him. But I think the problem with calling everything fake news or whole networks like CNN, where I used to work, is that actually a lot of what they do is very important, good journalism. Some of their stuff perhaps has been over the top on Trump, but I think broadly speaking we need networks like CNN, particularly when you have very partisan networks in America like Fox News, MSNBC, both of which I can watch and enjoy, even though they're completely different from their political standpoint. So I think we have to be careful about dismissing everything as fake news, because once you go down that road, people don't know what to believe. You know, facts should always be sacred and important. Debate around those facts, I think, is a different matter. That you can be as partisan as you like. You can argue about a fact, but you can't change the fact.
Piers Morgan, always interesting. You can subscribe to my podcast, Farage Against the Machine, on iTunes or go to lbc.co.uk. Now, I'm asking you whether Tony Blair, frankly, is becoming a bit delusional when he says we can delay Brexit, have a renegotiation, the EU's going to reform, give us powers back on immigration, then we'll have a final vote and vote to stay in. Matt in Sidcup says, you're a Trump fan. You can't be any more delusional than that. Blair scares you. Otherwise, you wouldn't waste your time going on about him. No, Matt. Blair did scare me. He was a very, very powerful election-winning machine. He doesn't scare me anymore. I think he's completely out of touch. Now, I've been asking about this CO2 shortage. Some of you have told me it's because we make CO2 as a byproduct of fertiliser manufacture. I'm not sure. But Phil from Swansea is on the line to help us. Phil, good evening.
Oh, hello there. Where to begin? In the first place, forget about Trump, because I agree with him on climate change. But CO2, CO2 is a very important and very rare gas in the atmosphere. Very important, of course, because all the plant life on the planet feeds on CO2. If there's no CO2, everything will die, including us. So I found a textbook in a charity shop, which I read 55 years ago when I was in school. And according to this textbook, which I read 55 years ago, the CO2 content was 0.04%, 0.04% of the atmosphere. Look it up on the internet today, it's 0.04% of the atmosphere. It's exactly the same.
But, Phil, that's a different argument. Why are the pubs running out of lager, Phil?
Well, because, it's a slightly different argument.
It is.
But I'm just phoning in to say that people are sort of misinformed on the quantity of CO2 in the atmosphere. OK, Phil, it's a separate argument. We will do climate change one night, and please ring in and talk to us about that. You know, the point I was making was we're told there's way too much CO2 in the world, and yet we're running out of lager. It's a slightly separate point. Ludwig is calling from Corrington. Ludwig, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, Mr. Blair, is Mr. Blair right?
Mr. Blair is actually wrong. He's the one that actually had a bad immigration policy.
He did.
And that's why Mr. Farage won the Brexit vote.
Do you know what, Ludwig? I think I agree with that.
That's why you won the Brexit vote. The words you said is communities have changed.
Yep.
And the people actually went to the polling booth and actually voted.
Yep.
And that's why you actually had such a popular support.
But so why doesn't Tony Blair, intelligent man, election-winning machine that he was, why doesn't he recognise that?
But Tony Blair just forgot to build the hospitals and housing and all that. He just had an open-door policy.
But why doesn't he understand? I mean, I think what he's saying today looks ridiculous. You know, the idea of the EU reforming and giving us back, it just isn't going to happen, Ludwig, is it?
No, it's not, no.
So he is deluding himself?
He is deluding himself.
Okay,
totally.
no, super, thank you. Tony Blair didn't listen to 2 million people about the Iraq war. Why should we listen to him? Go away, Blair. You are yesterday's man, says Paul. A big mixture of opinions and passions on Blair, as there always are. Let's ask Graham in Wandsworth what he thinks. Good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm doing all right, thank you. I'm just a bit puzzled by Blair doing this today and the timing of it.
Well, no, I'm not entirely sure whether you can classify him as delusional. I think he's taking a lot of information from those that are around him, supporting him still, and so on. But I guess my main thing for calling was to find out what makes you different to him in terms of having a platform to speak. I mean, you're on the radio daily for an hour or two. Mm-hmm. He's had a meeting where he's had a smaller audience than you. What makes you different in being able to have an opinion and have those be able to listen to you
Graham,
and make their own decisions?
Graham, I'm not for one moment suggesting that Tony Blair shouldn't speak. I'm not for one moment suggesting we shouldn't listen to Tony Blair when he does speak. I'm suggesting that for somebody who had the zeitgeist the way that he did back in the 90s, for somebody who was really, with Mandelson and Campbell, pretty visionary about the way they reformed and the way they took the Labour Party and made it this electoral winning machine, I'm just saying that it looks a bit sad in a way that somebody who achieved all these things is now flogging a dead horse. That's what I'm saying.
But is he? Because equally you're doing the same about Brexit. You're still championing even though you've left the political arena, so to speak, through...
Oh, I'll be at the European Summit tomorrow, Graham, representing a group in the European Parliament, within whom we have Italians now in government, Swedes topping polls and Germans changing politics. I'm still very involved in politics on a European level, if not on the UK one. But, Graham, I'm just saying to you, I'm deeply frustrated about the way Brexit's going, the time it's taking, and all the rest of it. And I can now understand why businesses are getting a bit upset because, hey, can we please just get on with this and know where we are? But Graham, the point I'm making is, I think we're going to leave, aren't we? We're going to leave the treaties on March the 29th next year. That's what royal assent to that bill was all about yesterday. And to try and pretend we're not, I think it just looks a little bit fantastical.
It's worth having another opinion, not even if it's enacted or followed. It's worth having an understanding about the wider scope, wouldn't you agree?
I do, and that's where I really think Blair's wrong, Graham. That's where I really think Blair's wrong, because the whole thesis here is that we delay Brexit, the European Union then reforms, gives us back power over immigration, and that is being said, Graham, the day after the French finance minister is saying we must have more power at the centre, a Eurozone budget, a Eurozone minister. And the point I'm making is that anyone that knows what's going on in Brussels knows they are centralising ever more deeply, they're not giving powers back. And I just wonder why Blair's... I mean, clearly he believes in the European project. I just think he's... Graham, I could be wrong. I just feel he's very wide of the mark.
I agree with you that we need to get on with it. I mean, I'm actually bored of listening to it on the radio and everywhere you go. It's Brexit.
Yeah, I know.
We need to get on with it and develop and so on.
Get on with it. Put it behind us and move on. Yeah. No, Graham, I agree. I've got time for one last call. Very quickly, I'm going to go to James in Finchley. Good evening, James.
Good evening, Nigel. Nice to talk to you.
Good to talk to you.
Tony Blair not only is delusional, he's lost his memory, because I can recall that he went to Brussels to beg them to change things and gave away half the rebate that Mrs. Thatcher...
Oh, I was there. I was there.
What did he come back with? He came back with a mess of pottage.
He gave away about £7 billion, and I attacked him for it, and he shouted at me, and I think I'm the only person he's actually ever gone puce in the face and shouted at. And, James, do you know what? I was really proud of that.
Well, I'm proud of you for being proud.
James, he's lost the plot, hasn't he? We're leaving.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're leaving. Maybe on bad terms with him. Thank you. Paul says, no flag is better than the Union Jack. That's pure British to me, and it should fly above everywhere. Well, Paul, that and not the European Union flag. And I'm reminded here by Nicholas, didn't David Cameron not fly the Saltire at the time of the Scottish referendum over number 10? He did, as a message to say, come on, we love you, stay part of us. And now Mrs May has done the opposite and actually is giving the SNP and Sinn Féin ammunition for every single election leaflet they put out next time round. Mrs May should show her Englishness in lots of different ways, but I don't think that flag above number 10 makes any sense. Now, tomorrow, I'll be at the summit, but I won't be broadcasting because it's the State of London debate. Clive Ball's going to kick off the debate at 7 p.m. tomorrow, but I'll be back on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Tonight at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thanks very much indeed. Lots to come between now and 10. At 9, it's the Legal Hour. Barry.